Good evening and welcome to Newham's LGBT History Month. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's films. And now I'm going to hand you over to Nuala O'Sullivan of the Women Over 50 Film Festival.
Hello and welcome to the Newham LGBT History Month presented by Newham Community Cinema in partnership with WOF. That's the Women Over 50 Film Festival. We hope you enjoyed those two fantastic films there on offer this week. That's The Passionate Pursuits of Angela Bowen and The Watermelon Woman. I'm Nuala O'Sullivan from WOF. And maybe maybe you've seen me in the real world where we've screened short films with Newham Community Cinema at Stratford Library. So maybe we've met before. If so, hello. And if this is the first time we're meeting, hello. Welcome everyone. And we're so glad that you're with us this evening. You can see Irina here, and she is signing for us, and she works with her organization, Sign for All. And we also have our special guest tonight, Jennifer, and I'll be introducing her and talking to her a bit more in a moment. Just a description of me, if anybody wants to know what I look like. I'm a short white-haired, short woman. I'm white, I'm wearing a dark top, and I'm sitting on a chair with a tartan cover in front of a bookcase with books behind me. We're recording this session, so that means if you want to watch it again, you can do so on demand on the Newham website. That's newhamlgbthistory.org. I'll just run through now what the next 30 or 40 minutes is going to look like, and then we'll get started on our conversation with the director of tonight's short, The Passionate Pursuit of Angela Bowen. It's Jennifer Abod, and she'll be joining us. She's here already all the way from Long Beach in California. So we're really delighted to have her with us. So Jennifer and I will start off with a few thoughts about the feature film, The Watermelon Woman, and then we'll dive into a discussion about Jennifer's own work on this amazing documentary you've had a chance to see. We'll talk about her filmmaking, her painting, her poetry, and we'll look at LGBTQI grieving and healing, particularly in the older lesbian community, as well as look at her life as an artist in these COVID times. We want you to join us in this conversation, so please put any comments about either of the films or any questions you have for Jennifer, just pop them in the chat and we'll come to them later in the session. We'll wrap up our time together with some useful links, so ways that you can follow Jennifer and find out more about her work. And we'll give you some information on what we're up to next Thursday when it's our final event together for this LGBT History Month of online films and discussions in partnership with Newham Council. So I am delighted, friends, to introduce this evening's guest. It's Jennifer Abod. Jennifer is a filmmaker, activist, and poet. As a white, Jewish, lesbian feminist, she says, I've always set my sights on expanding my views and perspectives, and all of my projects reflect that journey. I hope that my work, which records particular women who have greatly influenced my ideas and my life, might benefit others with similar intentions. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So let's kick off with The Watermelon Woman. This film was originally released in the early 90s and re-released recently to celebrate its 25th anniversary. I saw it back in the day and it was great to watch it again for this event. It was the first feature film directed by a Black lesbian and is considered a landmark in new queer cinema. It's a fascinating semi-documentary, what the director Cheryl Dunye herself described as Dunye-mentary. So she invented a new word to describe this interesting hybrid approach she had. It's a mixture of drama, reality TV, before we even had those words, and a really interesting invented/created history made by a really pioneering filmmaker. I love the quote at the end, which said, sometimes you have to create your own history. And I think that's true of lots of people, especially on the margins, and no more so than for queer people of colour. Jennifer, what did you think of The Watermelon Woman?
Well, believe it or not, and it's hard to admit this, but I knew of The Watermelon Woman, but I never saw it until just a couple of days ago. It was 1996 that it was released. I remember I was 50 years old at the time. The conference that Angela and my partner Angela Bowen, that she's in the painting behind me that I did, and Jackie Alexander for Audre Lorde took place in 1990. And during that time period, also the first documentary was made by about Audre Lorde. I think it was before this. So what was interesting was to watch Cheryl in her, who was 24 at the time, right? That they had this, you know, I talked to a friend of mine who was one of the people who did the archival work and some other stuff, and she was talking to me about how people came from, by train and bus to contribute to this because there was no money. It was a very low budget thing. Everybody did it for no money at all. And it was, you know, it was a low budget independent film. And it reminded me of the conference that the film that I made about Audre Lorde, The Edge of Each Other's Battles, the vision of Audre Lorde that Angela did, because that's what it was. It was a ragtag group of people with whatever cameras we had. I think we had $500 to make the film, something like that. I was sitting up in the balcony and, you know, directing people with the cameras down because it was an old church. And so it reminded me of that because it was during it was for me in the 90s, the Black lesbian feminism movement really started to take off. Audre Lorde was more well known. The concept of Black lesbian feminism was being, you know, was known. Cheryl Clark was one of the people who was in the film. It was a wonderful poet. So I thought it was a brilliant fictional characterization of her quest to unsilence the historic suppression of Black women in Hollywood. And, you know, the grassroots people came together with the bold and brave vision of Cheryl. It was so realistic that they had to add at the end of the film that that there was not a person named the Watermelon Woman. There was nobody named Faye, whatever it was. And, you know, that, and that she was making, that she felt emboldened to be naked on screen and have a sex scene on screen and then have this kind of conversation between her friends, especially about the tensions around Black and white women as partners together, which was in the air. I certainly know that because I was with a Black woman. So it was exciting for me to see it, and it was so well done. And it reminds me of the documentary I just recently saw on American Masters called How It Feels to Be Free. It's a brand new documentary that was based on a book by a Jewish woman, Ruth Feldstein. And the film tells a story about how 6 pioneering women, Diane Carroll, Nina Simone, Cicely Tyson, Abby Lincoln, and Pam Grier, how they broke through an entertainment industry that was hell-bent on keeping them out. And it was directed by an award-winning director, Yoruba Richin, I think I pronounced her name right, you know, who did also the Green Book. And so what was exciting to me about watching this documentary, not only that the story was being told about real people, you know, and their experiences with the Hollywood blacklists and racism, including Jewish producers, one of which was the one to allow Diane Carroll to be part of a program. That's really worth watching, believe me. And but what was exciting to me was to see all these young Black professional professors in the media talking about the film, that how far we've come. There's been a whole 1 generation, 2 generations of Black women who have acquired scholarly skills to be able to impact, to be able to talk about the real experiences on television, you know, about the experiences of Black women in Hollywood. So it's just full circle to be able to watch Watermelon Woman now, and also this film in 2021 called, again, How It Feels to Be Free, which of course is the Nina Simone song, and to do that. So I was thrilled actually to have the opportunity to watch it and realize I hadn't seen it. I had been reading about it for so long that I thought I saw it, but I hadn't seen it. And it was a busy time, 1996.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting to give it some real historical context, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's interesting that also in your short, it covers a similar kind of time period for some of it. And you mentioned in passing there that you were in a relationship with Angela, which isn't we didn't know that from watching the film. So I mean, I think I could guess, but I'd like you to tell us, what was your inspiration for making The Passionate Pursuit of Angela Bowen?
Well, I had made a film about Audre Lorde based on the conference called The Edge of Each Other's Battles, The Vision of Audre Lorde, which is available from Women Make Movies, from Vimeo, and also on Canopy. And when Angela saw, well, I wanted to do another film. I mean, once I finished the Audre film, and I knew I wanted it to be about Black women because I'm meeting them and inspired by their perspective. As a white woman, I had a lot to learn. And Audre Lorde said, you know, who will ever tell our stories unless we tell them, right? And I was in a position to help to tell the stories. Audre Lorde always said to me too, and other women who are white, you will be in rooms I will never be in. So I wanted to do that. And I was looking around and asking people and trying to figure out who, and I realized that my partner, Dr. Angela Bowen's stories that I've been hearing for 20 years were, if not the basis of a play, you know, or a full miniseries, at least would be something to do in a documentary, that her stories through her eyes, you know, having been born in 1936 in Roxbury in a segregated community, and hearing her stories of survival, her stories of how she learned to trust her voice through her mother's care, and that her mother's feeding her politics as well as confidence in her own voice, how she managed to tread the white stages of Broadway despite the racism that was going on, and how she strove to not only examine and imagine how she could expand her own thinking and tap into her own talents, but how she could do that for other people as well. And I felt as though that was a message for all of us. And it certainly had inspired me being with her. She was not a coward. She was brave. She was bold. She rescued a foster child from sexual abuse, a stepchild from sexual abuse, and was part and parcel of an entire, and brought Black community and culture to a town behind Yale University that really never had, that was an oasis for Black culture and history. So besides, she was the person I loved the most in the world, and I wanted to know about her life, what she was like before I met her, because I was 32 when I met her and she was 42. She had a whole life before I knew her. And so doing the film was both a personal love story and also, I think, a piece of history to the future. And the fact that you're screening it here in 2021 is a testament that it is a timeless and timely piece.
Yeah, and real similarities with Watermelon Woman. You know, when the filmmaker says, you know, your story means something to you and it means something to me, and we can all take something from this story, but it's got to be made for us to be able to make something of it. I thought one of the themes that both the feature film and the short have in common is around a lesbian relationship with a Black woman and a white woman.
Yes.
And that both these films are based in America in the 80s and 90s. So I'd like to ask what your personal experience of racial and sexual politics was of that time in America.
Well, I think I was lucky because we were in Boston and in Cambridge by then. The Combahee River Collective, I think, had just recently released their book. Barbara Smith was still living, I believe, in Cambridge, or had just left. There was a flourishing Black lesbian community. Jewel Gomez was in Cambridge and Boston. And so and I met Black lesbians and feminists, also feminists who were not lesbian, because of radio. I was involved with radio, and we created a 24-hour program every International Women's Day to do radio. So I was working with women of color, Latina women, Puerto Rican women, no Asian women that I can remember. But I was part of a multicultural group of women who were doing arts, literature. Angie was creating cultural events. So I was part of that. And we were all part of each other's lives. And while at the same time, I was learning about racism, and I was an anti-racist. We were raising a family. We had 2 children to raise. So it was a very exciting period. It wasn't segregated. It was something that feminism, and Audre Lorde in particular, which was somebody we generated around, all of us did, brought us together. And we worked and there weren't that many of us. So we really needed each other to keep making, presenting each other's work, to provide platforms for what we believed in. There was, I think that I was lucky to be part of that.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the later stages of your relationship, because we know now that Angie is dead. There's a beautiful picture that you did behind you there on the mantelpiece. You're an artist, you're a filmmaker, you're a poet. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the grieving process, because I think it's something that all of us are having to cope with much more because of COVID.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you could tell us something about the grieving process. And I know that you did a big poetry event specifically for lesbians who have lost their partners, and it was a huge success. Can you tell us a little bit about your grieving process and how your art, ties into that?
Well, I don't know when I came out of my coma, of when after her death. I had been a caregiver for 8 years. The last 2 years, of course, were the worst because she had Alzheimer's and she really didn't have language. But she knew who I was. So the grieving process began, the minute that she received the diagnosis, and I had to gird myself because I knew I was going to take care of her somehow for as long as I could. And so, but I didn't really have an opportunity to grieve that loss until she actually died, because I'm in the process of making everything happen to have her be cared for. However, I did begin writing poetry then. I had written poetry as a kid. I wrote poetry when I first discovered I was a lesbian. And I had a friend of mine, Kitty Sway, who I made a film about actually, who was a poet at the time. And I felt like I needed to record how much I loved her while she was here. And a friend of mine told me, you need to find joy in every moment. Well, that saved my life, to be able to create moments of joy, while I was caring for her. It was a very isolated time. I had very few friends at that moment. I didn't have community. We had been so busy in our lives that I had a friend in San Diego, my sister was in Santa Fe, and I had a therapist. So I didn't have community, and that I was very isolated. And that was very, 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 very scary. So the poetry was the way that, as Audre Lorde said, I gave name to the nameless so that it could be thought. And last night, I had gathered together. One of the things that I did once I came out of my coma, the lost coma, was to create 2 Zoom groups. One was a lesbian widows group, a Zoom group, and the other was a poetry with friends group. And so I determined that the best way to kind of deal with issues of being lesbian widows, and I'm not sure that everybody agrees with that term, not everybody will like that term, but for lack of a better term, I brought lesbian widows together whom I met through the poetry group and through the lesbian widow group and through the people that I knew who were poets in Oakland, like Alana Dykewoman and other people. And we had 5 of us yesterday. I did a really good job of doing that thing. And there were 97 people that came. And this was just, shared on Facebook. And the poems were wonderful. The response has been just accolades and the desire for more connection. There were people who were crying, because there's one person in this community and then one person in that community. And it's not just us, people being in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. There were women who were in their 40s there. And it's very important to realize that people who are in their 40s are also losing their partners. There's an isolation beyond COVID about being lesbian, and also having lost the main person that created community if there wasn't a big community around. It's a very necessary thing. And one woman from Old Lesbians Organizing for Change was there, Ruth Deborah. And they are planning on doing something more about old lesbians, maybe through poetry. So I suggest that anybody, at least who's like 60 years older and older, to check out Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. But it made me realize how I needed community. And so I started creating community, creating Zoom groups to bring together people that would feed me. Poetry fed me. Talking about being a widow fed me and kept me buoyant, kept me going. And the personal is political. That was feminist, right? Well, I'm personally affected. So my poems are very, they're not only centered on Angela, but much of my poems recorded in some ways the loss of her, and then the acceptance of having her inside me, and being able to actually feel as though that everything that she's given me and the love that she's given me and that I carry it with me. It took me a long time, it felt like, to feel that she was inside me, so that I could be, here talking in front of you today and not curled up in a bed someplace, So we have to share our stories, not only when we were 24 and 25, but we have to share our stories now. And especially now when we're really the first generation of lesbian widows to claim that particular title. People may change their names and identities and however you want to talk about it, because it's kind of whatever. But at this point, I remember going to a poetry reading and saying that I was a lesbian widow and having people laugh at me. It was a mixed group. It was a heterosexual mixed group. And people laughed because the concept, first of all, being lesbian, that you choose a woman, number one, and then you were a widow. They couldn't even wrap their mind around it. They just laughed. And so I just decided, okay, I've had to claim my identity and had the word lesbian fit comfortably in my mouth when it didn't. And I had to keep that word widow, which means after a heterosexual concept of being married, I'm a lesbian widow. Those two things don't fit comfortably in my mouth, but I don't know how else to identify. And we need to identify in order for us to exist, right? So, yeah, it's a whole thing. I'm still in the process of it. It's only been 2.5 years, so.
Yeah, it's an ongoing it's an ongoing
relationship.
Totally, yeah. We've got some questions in, and we'll come back and chat a bit more if we have time. It'd be interesting to hear about the differences that older women experienced during their lifetime. I would also like to see the film about Audre Lorde, whose biography I've read. How can I access it? Says Carol. I think you mentioned it at the beginning, but it went quite fast. Can you just say the name of your film again and how people could access it? And that's from Carol. Thanks for that.
Yeah, The Edge of Each Other's Battle, The Edge of Each Other's Battles, The Vision of Audre Lorde. That was slower. It is carried by Women Make Movies. It's on Vimeo, so it's cheap, and you can get it that way. And you'll see Angela in that film, because Angela was one of the organizers of the film, because Angela was felt like she was in an army to help bring the idea of Black lesbian feminism into the public. And you see that in the film, how she was on national television, and she spoke as a spokeswoman for it, when very few people were not speaking out.
Right.
So
we'll definitely try and look into that film. Thanks.
Yes.
Here's another question. Have you ever been accused of taking up space that belongs to Black queer voices? If so, how have you handled that?
Never. I think people were so grateful that this film was made. We only have 3 films about Audre Lorde while Audre Lorde was alive. One of them was Dagmar Schultz in Berlin. The other is Michelle Parkinson from New York. And then there's me. I think that that has never been an issue. I certainly didn't take up any space in the film. The only way that I showed up was singing Blueberry Hill, which is what I had organized that on stage at the conference with Blackberry. No, I haven't been accused of any of those things or felt that. I think people are just grateful that they have that material, available to them. And, yeah, I mean, I've never, yeah, I don't, that's never happened to me, thank heavens. I don't think that I made my films in any way that, that would suggest that I was using people, rather that I was trying to let people learn about racism and the pain of racism, and to help to spread the word of Audre Lorde, which spoke specifically to white women about how to deal with their racism, how to recognize racism, and to do something about it. So as a white woman, as a white anti-racist woman, my work has been to help in whatever way that I could, because I was a filmmaker, to help to address the issues that we're just talking, many more white women are talking about now.
Good. Here's a question about Watermelon Woman. It says, is from Janet. Would you say the strength of Cheryl's Black lesbian characters has been groundbreaking in allowing a tough criminality which does not seek, I'm not sure about the word criminality, but I'll read it as it is, and then we can look at it. Would you say the strength of Cheryl's Black lesbian characters has been groundbreaking in allowing a tough criminality which does not seek to sanitize the character's strength for a mainstream white audience?
I'm not sure what was criminal about it, except the only thing that was criminal about what was in that film was the suppression of Black women in Hollywood, and that's what her mission was. That was that she created all these brilliant fictional characters in order to unsilence, like I said before, the historic suppression of Black women in Hollywood. So otherwise the word doesn't work. What there was a very authentic communication between friends, the tension between friends that was in the air. About Black women dating white women. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Are you betraying the race? How are you doing? So that was a big thing in our relationship. Angela got that a lot, actually. She joined a Black lesbian group along with Jackie Alexander, and they didn't want to talk about anything because both Jackie and Angie at that time had white lovers. Audre Lorde had a white lover at the time, and they would say things like, "We don't care, even if it's Audre Lorde, we're not dealing with women who, Black women who have white lovers." So that was really a big deal back then. And they both had to leave the group, even though Audre Lorde wanted them to stay in the group because she wanted people to stay together. But then she wrote a poem about it, recognizing that she was wrong to advise them to stay someplace where they were not being supported. Mm-hmm. I don't think there was anything criminal about. So I'm not sure. I don't like the use of the way that question.
Maybe Janet, if you can kind of write it in other words, in case I'm not.
Well, let's put it this way. The point is that the major issue that she was trying to deal with, the criminal issue that she was trying to deal with, was the unsilencing of the historic suppression of Black women in Hollywood, and that she was so bold to let us see the tensions between her friend, that there was an authentic communication between them. Everybody was irritating. She was irritated at everybody. She was making fun of people who were white women who were trying to sing Black songs, women who were singing white songs. She made fun of everybody, a little bit even even herself, because she was confused. She's 24 years old and she's trying to figure out everything that she's not really sure about. And she let that vulnerability, I think, be very clear. So let's move on.
Yeah. If there's any more questions, I'll see them as they come in. One thing I'd like to ask you about is about within the LGBTQI community, and I'm wondering how important you think community is within that wider community, particularly for lesbians, particularly as they get older. How important is community? I think you've touched on this already, but I wonder if you say a bit more.
It's critical for our survival. And I think we have to figure out what our responsibility is to each other. I've talked to women who are older, who are the only people living in a trailer camp. They're the only people in their town as older lesbians. And I think that, and the isolation, I think, is painful. When you're an old woman, you become discarded because you're no longer useful to the culture. You don't have the, bouncing boobs and all that. And even among our own lesbian communities, I think that there's a tremendous amount of ageism that lesbians who are 50 years old and older even face. I think that, and talk about the word criminal, I think that's criminal. I mean, that needs education, that we really need to educate ourselves about the differences, like that Audre Lorde said. What are the differences that keep us apart? Well, we're not learning from each other. I mean, what was wonderful about last night and the poetry reading for lesbians is that there were women who were in their 40s as well as in their 70s, who were talking about their experiences of grief. And right now, I don't think we have a lot of opportunities to kind of exchange those kinds of those conversations, but wow, we learn a lot about each other, about how we survive in our communities. I think we have to talk about our responsibility to each other. Who picks up the phone to call somebody who's living alone, who needs groceries, who needs a ride to the COVID shot, who needs a floor to dance on, who needs a hand to hold, who needs a book to inspire them, who needs a piece of music sent over a cell phone. I think that we are trying to survive for ourselves, but if we don't feel responsibility to each other, we can't possibly build community. And it's possible to even do that with 2 people or 3 people. And I challenge every single one of us to figure out how to build that community within our own places of where we're living and within our own isolation. We will not survive. We will be erased. Names, our identities are being erased. It's important, and those conversations that we have to have about queer, non-binary, and lesbian, how do we coexist in those commonalities, and not erase each identity because they think it's passé. That's a waste. That's a waste of energy. Do not erase what it took for me to be a lesbian and to be able to say that word. You can say queer. I'll be happy to fit into that category, but not at the expense of erasing my identity and women who came before me, what it took for them to actually say those words in public, write about it, make films about it, write poems about it, write songs about it, and dress like a lesbian and take whatever shit they're going to take. So if we don't have those conversations, if we don't reach out to people beyond who we think we should, but to find out how each of others is isolated, we have to figure out ways to build community, especially in times of extreme isolation for everybody.
Yeah, and totally. And these Thursday evenings have become a real highlight of my week, and I'm really enjoying, when I see who's in the chat and recognizing people who are there. It's so nice to have these points. As you say, you can make community with just 1 or 2 people. For me, I'm sitting here having a chat with a filmmaker I love, and it's great.
I mean, like the Lesbian Widows group, there's sometimes somebody's, there's only about 6 of us, right, in this little group. Sometimes 4 people don't show up. You have one conversation with one other person. I feel good going to bed that night. Same thing about the poetry with friends. Whoever shows up in terms of me, it keeps building communities, and then people keep coming back anyway. They go in and out and whatever, but you have to have these opportunities.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's up to us each to try and put that hand out and welcome somebody in. We're all feeling lonely. We're all feeling a bit abandoned just now.
And when you're a widow, when you are a lesbian widow, when you have lost the soulmate, or whether you were married or not, it is, it doesn't stop. And it's something that each of us need to recognize. If we find people like that in our communities, that a phone call could be nice,
Yeah.
not to feel sorry, but to extend, you want to encourage that person to live in the presence, in the absence of their loved one. How do you do that,
Yeah. Yeah. And for us not to be scared of death and dying. It's coming to us all. And actually, when you talk to somebody who's lost someone, the love that there's
Yes.
we want to talk so much about the person we love, and we
Yeah.
shouldn't be scared of that. So what you're doing to help people talk about these things is really important. And I think we should all take a leaf out of your book.
Yeah,
for
I mean, we're
sure.
not in a culture that really recognizes death as something that we have such weird, it's not good, and everything's raw, raw, raw. And, I think that the Mexican culture, I think, deals with death. I think there are other cultures that deal with death a lot better than the white cultures. And how we deal with it. I don't think it like so many other things, we're not taught to understand our feelings or have respect for it, and not to be afraid of it. So there's just it's a lot up for us to learn and share about it.
Absolutely. Jennifer, it's just been absolutely fantastic talking to you, and lovely to see your face. It's been a really nice conversation. We could go on to the wee small hours. I just have a few announcements to make, and then I'll loop back to you again in a moment. I want to thank everybody for joining us. You all came in. We were a bit worried where people were, and now I see that you're all here, which is great. In the chat, Priscilla, the moderator, will have put some links. There'll be links, for example, to the Newham LGBT History Month website, where you'll be able to catch up with this conversation again, and the other ones that we've had in the other Thursdays. There'll be links to Irina's organisation, Sign for All, from the organisation I run, Women Over 50 Film Festival. And there are also links about Jennifer, social media and her website, and other places that you can continue to follow along with her work. Particularly because we had Jennifer with us and we were talking specifically about older LGBT people. We put a link in there if you haven't heard of the organisation Opening Doors London, which is the largest UK charity providing activities and events, information and support services specifically for LGBTQI, non-binary and gender fluid people who are over 50. So do check out Opening Doors. Next week, on Thursday, the 25th of February, it's our final week of these Thursday night LGBT online film and conversations. We are screening two great films. One is called The Journey, and the short film next week is Halwa, Halwa. And they are two lesbian love stories centered on South Asian women. And each story is told from a different time point of view. The Journey is a story of two schoolgirls navigating first love, while Halwa, Women Over 50 short film festival film, is the story of an older woman reconnecting with her first love, a girl that she met at school. I do hope you'll join us for them. But for now, it's goodbye from our guest, Jennifer Abod.
Thank you so much. I hope the people who are here will check out the webpage, and also kind of check into the Facebook page, because next week there's going to be a Google Doc that we recorded the session yesterday. That was pretty great, and it's going to be available next week on my Facebook page. So check it out. Check out the website. I also have a film called Nice Chinese Girls Don't. I think you know about that one. And also look us in the eye, the Old Women's Project, which is, it comes from a book that Barbara McDonald and Cynthia Rich wrote about, the relationship between sexism and ageism, particularly within the lesbian and feminist community. So there's a lot of information on my webpage.
Fantastic.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think you're doing great work in trying to build community, and you know, I hope more people know about it. I want to have some links so that I can see the films you're doing as well. And it's just been an honor to be here. Thank you, Dominique, and thank you so much for our interpreter, whose name I can't remember.
Irina.
Thank you so much for being here, and for people who participated. I hope that you enjoyed the film, and if you didn't get a chance to see it, to check it out on Vimeo. It's there.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And it's goodbye from me and from Irina and Monica and Dominique and Priscilla and all the gang here. And I hope we see you next Thursday. Bye for now.